So you've been watching some YouTube guys kind of like me, and you see all this bling, I'm sorry, hardware behind me, right? So you've been thinking to yourself lately, I'd like to add some hardware to my existing setup. I want to record through some of that analog goodness that everybody talks about so much. You know, a lot of people are doing it. You watch guys like me, other guys, you see all of this stuff behind me, right? All of that bling, hardware is behind me, and you get excited about it, right? You want to turn some knobs, you want to turn some dials. You want that analog bliss affecting your recordings, right? Well, I think a lot of people want that. A lot of people want it. Nothing wrong with wanting that. But let me just share something with you. You don't need the hardware. You don't need it. If you get it, it's because you want it. You don't need it. Well, that's not all of you, but that's a heck of a lot of you out there. You don't really need it. And so ultimately, you can do tremendous work just all in the box. Tremendous work. And so I want you to understand that. So before you go invest some of your money, think about what is your return on investment? What is it going to do for you? And be realistic about that. That is probably the best advice I can give you. Be realistic, because so many people aren't. And for most people, when they get that new piece of analog, they hear things in it that seem like a huge thing to them, and the reality is probably not that much. It's because you want to love it, you want to enjoy it, and all these things. Now, does analog hardware improve the sound of your recordings? Yeah, in my opinion, it does. It does, but to what degree? And is it worth the cost? So now we've got to weigh back and forth. If we're going to invest in hardware, let's find out, first of all, let's understand why we want to do it. What is it we hope to get out of it? And so I just spoke about one of them. Most of you think it's going to, or not most of you, there are some of you that like to think it's going to transform your recordings. And in your mind, it very well may be. And you want to be able to experience that. For others, you just like the idea of the tactile surface. You like being able to turn knobs because plugins just don't feel real. They sound great, but they just don't feel real. So touching a piece of analog gear and turning dials and knobs is a wonderful experience. I'm not going to lie to you, it is. I truly enjoy doing it. But I also understand that I'm only seeing a marginal bump in the overall quality. So ultimately, if you're only going to see a marginal bump, why invest at all? Well, we do this because we love it. Boys and their toys. We're known for this. Why do we buy a boat when we only use it 3 months out of the year for most of the country? Why do it? Because it's fun. We enjoy doing it. Why buy a boat? You're going to lose all of your money. You know what they say, greatest 2 days of a boat owner's life, the day they buy it and the day they sell it, which means get that monkey off my back kind of thing. But yet we still do it because we enjoy these things. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you work hard, you earn a good living, and you've got extra money that's not going to get in the way of your family or anything else like that, and you've got it, and that's your hobby, that's your choice. It's mine. I don't have a boat. I've got this, and I've got my wood shop. Those are my two things that I enjoy doing tremendously. And so ultimately, for me, it's worth every penny. But then again, too, for a lot of people, maybe not so much. So understand that when you're going down this journey. So if you are going to start with a piece of analog, let me give you some advice to consider. The first thing most people start with is a mic preamp, a dedicated mic preamp. And there is a lot of benefit to a dedicated mic preamp. So you want to choose the right one. You've got lots of options out there, lots of Neve style, API style, Universal Audio style, Trident, Midas. I go on and on. Grace Audio, I could keep going on and on and on. Lots of great microphone preamps out there. And so you can get them from anywhere across the board price-wise. And then you've got other things, okay? Now, what you see in most channel strips, a lot of people like the idea of channel strips. But I'm going to tell you, they're not as practical as you may think, or at least a lot of them aren't. Because a lot of them include EQs. And my advice to you is do not EQ on the way in. Just do not do it. You don't know how that track's going to sit in that mix when all the other parts are finally put together, especially if you're somebody who's kind of creating and writing and arranging as you're going through the process. You don't want to take anything away from that. You can always go back and do that later. So I never quite understood why they choose to put a lot of EQs in these versus a more important thing to have in a channel strip, in my opinion, is a mic preamp and a compressor. I don't overly compress when I go in. I typically do it lightly, and then any heavier compression I'm gonna do later on. That's the safe way of doing it. If I know exactly what I'm going for, and I've already got that song mapped out in my mind, and I've kind of got a feel for it, I'm trying to bring in the zen of Al Smith as an example, where I can kind of hear that before it even gets done, then I might do it in that situation. But unfortunately, if you do it too much, you can't undo it, which is why I tend to go fairly light on compression. Plus, it helps the artist, whoever's singing or whoever's performing, depending on what it is, it can inspire them to do more. And so these things all affect things. So I think having a good mic preamp and a good compressor, think of the 6176 as an example. The 610 mic pre is not for everybody. It's not for every source, but it does a really good job on a lot of things. Vocals being one of them, especially if it's a darker song. But it's got the 1176 compressor on the other side of it. That's a great idea for a channel strip. There are others out there that have that, so keep that in mind. I've got channel strips here in my studio that have EQ on them. There's a couple of Neve clones in there that have EQ on them, but I never EQ on the way in. I'll use that as a hardware insert and go back out to it and process things I've recorded through that EQ. Now that is quite handy. I do that, and I have found that an analog EQ does sound better than a digital one. But again, you're splitting hairs. The difference is not great. It's not great, so kind of keep that in mind. So anyway, if you're looking for this, you want to have a mic preamp, preferably a mic preamp and a compressor. Those are the really two things. They don't have to be in a single channel strip. You can have a dedicated mic preamp, and you can have a dedicated compressor. And you just go into the mic preamp, out of the mic preamp, into the compressor, out of the compressor, into your recording interface. And then later on, if you need to use that compressor as a hardware insert, you do that as a hardware insert. You come out of your interface into your compressor, process the signal, bring it back and return it back to the interface. And now you're using that as an external piece of hardware. And you can do that. And you can just record that track back as you want and save your original. So you've always got your original, and now you've got the one that you've processed externally via analog. And so ultimately, if you're going to go down this road, really think about what you're going to do. Now, next up, and this is really important, what gear to buy? What gear to buy? Because this is one that's super important. Because one of the advantages of analog, if you buy the right piece of gear, is that you'll get your money back, or at least most of it, if you ever decide to sell it. Maybe you want to try a different flavor compressor, a different flavor mic preamp later. And so you decide to sell one of the two of them, and then you use that money and apply it towards the next purchase. Very common way of doing things for a lot of people, including myself. So if you're doing that in that situation, then it's worth spending the money on. But if you buy something, as an example, in the lower tier price point, now remember, lower tier, I'm not necessarily saying that it's much lower in quality, but it's a lower tier in price. And you think of your Clark Techniques, your Lindells, your Warm Audio, those things do not hold their value at all, at all. You're lucky on a good day to get 50% of your money back. Now, I have units from those manufacturers here in this studio. Some get used more than others, but ultimately, it's going to be about, really what makes sense. And you really got to think about that. In my opinion, it's better to save a little bit more to buy a mic preamp that's going to hold its value, or a compressor that's going to hold its value, or if you want an EQ that's going to hold its value, or whatever that external piece of hardware may be. You want to make sure you're in that, because you're not risking much. You decide you get out of it and realize analog's not for me, you just sell it, maybe you've lost a couple $100, okay? That's it. Versus losing $600-$700, depending on how much you spent and what you bought. So kind of keep that in mind as you're going through this. For me, I enjoy working with analog. I wouldn't want to not work with analog, but I'm also realistic about it. I know what I'm going to get out of it. Does it improve my recordings? Yes, it does. Does it improve my experience in the mixing process? You better freaking believe it does for me. We're not all the same. We don't all work the same way. We go about things different ways. So what drives you may be different than what drives me. But I'm going to tell you, these are my experiences. So if you want to go analog, consider all the things we've talked about today, and you very well may make the decision that I'm just staying in the box. Or you very well may make the decision, I'm ready to go into the next one, but maybe I'm going to save up a little bit more and really go check on Reverb and look at the history of sold prices for certain items to find out what they're likely to do in the future. That is a good indicator. You just go and look at the sold, look at all the ones that have sold and what they sold for. Not what they were asking for, but what they sold for. That's an important way to do it. So if you want to go out and buy a piece of hardware, this is where the shameless plug comes in. If you want to do that, I have an affiliation with Sweetwater, where if you need to buy something, I've got a link in the description down below. You really help me out in this channel because you don't make very much money off views, so I'm trying to supplement my income in other ways. And so I can keep this whole thing going. So in other words, if you go down to the description below, you'll see a link to Sweetwater. There's a few other places too if you want to buy from there. You copy that into your browser and you buy whatever you want to buy, and I get a tiny percentage of it. Really helps me out, and I would really appreciate it if you would do that for me. If you don't mind, if you appreciate the work that I do for you, then help me out and return in kind, right? So do me a favor, leave me some comments down below. Tell me what you think about this. Tell me what your experiences have been, both good, bad, indifferent, lessons learned, all those things along the way so we can all learn from each other. But until next time, I hope every one of you have a great day. Bye-bye.